Well, hello guys, welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to the build of the Boomerang Ranger aircraft. We are continuing on with this plane. So let's roll that intro and we will get back into the build of the Ranger. All right, so continuing where we left off, we were basically getting the elevators all set up and complete. So elevator servos at the time of the last video, I didn't have the other elevator servo done, but that one is now complete. Nice thing with these servos and setup and everything is it all just works. Now these are actually in the wrong slot. They're supposed to come out, that guy right there. So the small little leads from the thin wing servos are perfect for this situation because they just come out enough like that, and we just need to put a servo connector on there, which is great. So that's going to work out good. We may change this to a ash lock connector. Just need to make sure and confirm that that's going to work in this scenario, so that's something to think about. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to screw down the servo hatch covers. Now, keep in mind there are two different size screws. There's these longer ones and shorter ones. For this scenario situation, you're using the shorter ones. So we're going to screw those down, and then elevator servos are almost complete. We do need to mount the ball joints into the surface, so that's something that we need to finish as well. So there are already pre-drilled holes in these servo hatches. So you can see the little indent right there. All you need to do is find it and then use a small drill bit and just drill through the mounting surface, which in this situation is quite large. So we've got a decent amount of wood to bite into. All right, so once you've got the covers all screwed in, you want to pull the covers off and just put a drop of thin CA onto the holes, and now we can get these hatch covers reinstalled. All right, so I've got the servo plugged in here, and we are all centered on the tip of the elevator right there. So what I was doing was just getting this set up, centered, installed, and measuring the travel. Now we do get exactly 15 millimeters of travel each direction, which is what I think the manual is calling for. So we've talked a little bit about this. This 30 and 30 is way too much. So I think these numbers are all split. So it should be 15 and 15. Aileron should be 22 and 22. So that's what I think needs to happen there. You know, rudder 54, 54 maybe, but I think it's not going to be like that. So anyways, 15 millimeters of travel on the elevators or horizontal stabs is should be plenty of travel. So now that this is set up, all we're going to do is put a bit of Loctite on the bolt that goes through, and we'll put a bit of CA on the threads that go into the golden clevis, and that's going to lock everything in place. Okay, so just going through the manual here, so we've already hinged the vertical or the rudder, and that was done previously. Now in the manual they talk about cutting off the extra pin before you insert it. I didn't do that, I just cut it off right now with side cutters, not a big deal. I think it doesn't really matter what you do there. So just taking a look here, they're talking about drilling the holes now. I don't know why, but anyways, next thing we're going to do in this rudder step is number 19, which is prepping the hinge points or the control points for the actual rudder. Now you do have to trim or sand down the horns. If you left them too long, they'd poke out the other side, so you do need to sand those down to make sure that it's got enough clearance to be installed and not interfere with the other side. So that's all done. We've got the ball joint holding this all together, making it nice and solid and square. We've installed this into the surface itself like that, and used an X-Acto knife and cut the covering from around the mounting surface. So next thing to do is we're going to mix up some high sol, get this installed and curing, and then we can move on to the actual servo on the cover plate. All right, so control horn is all glued in place. I also added some blocks here while I was gluing that in, and that's going to space the servo out the right amount in that opening. So what we need to do now is just trim these blocks off, and then also add a relief there as well for the servo wire to come out of. So we'll mark that guy. So right in that area, we just need to add a relief. So I'm gonna get those trimmed, then we can get the servo mounted on the plate. Okay, so we've got our servo horn installed. We went with one of the 1-inch metal aluminum JR ones. Just run the lead out through the base of the vertical stab, so it's designed to come out of this hole right here, which matches up with the fuselage. And now we're going to screw this in place. So same thing as the elevators, we just look for the pre-made hole in the covering, which is right there, and we'll just drill a hole through each of those and get that screwed down. And then once that's done, control linkage. All right, so we've got the linkage all set up now. So we're going to do exactly the same thing that we did on the wings. We're going to measure out our carbon rod here and take one of the ball links off, get the carbon rod installed with some high sol, and get that reinstalled. All right, and everything's all set up with this linkage and rod and everything. We've added a washer there, and everything is good to go. One of the things I really love about these X-Bus servos and the 2K setup and all that stuff jives together really nicely. The servos are just quiet, so we got lots of throw there. When I say quiet, what I mean is when they're resting, they're quiet. We've got lots of throw there, and works good. Awesome little setup. Loving this plane more and more the more I work on it. Okay, so steps number 17, 18, 19, 20 for the vertical stab or rudder setup in the manual are complete. Next thing we're moving on to is installing the stabilizer to the fuselage. So we're essentially installing the fixing piece through the fuselage and gluing it in place. All right, so we've cleaned off the workbench here, and we've taken the rear part of the fuselage and installed the mounting point for the horizontal stab. So what I did on this case is I put it in one side, took it out, put it in the other side, took it out just to clean up some of the paint, and then pushed it all the way through. Now you do have access from the inside, so you can see the cross brace or the attachment point there. And also on the horizontal stabs, we have, if you look in the manual, there's basically 1, 2, 3 support points here. So there is 2 more cross pieces that go through there. Now I haven't taken this open or opened this thing up yet, so I'm assuming they're in here. So let's pop this guy open and see what's inside. We've got a whole bunch of stuff. So based on the fuselage here, the metal ones would be for the rudder or vertical stab, I think. I'm just making a guess here, pretty sure. And these guys, I would assume, are for the elevators or horizontal stab, which would make sense. So just like that, I would assume. Now lots of support here as well too. So we've got the 2 anti-rotation pins on the back part of these elevators. We've got the screw fitting there. Then we've got a fairly large primary carbon tube here and then a smaller one. So lots of support on these surfaces. So let's just see how that goes in. Looks like it's going to fit together nicely. Okay, so, oh, there we go. Perfect. So that just the anti-rotation pin was a little bit tight there. So yeah, that looks awesome. Big tail on this plane. That is a huge tail surface for the size of plane. Very impressive. Should have really good tail authority. This is a very similar size tail to a Carf Ultra Flash, which is hanging up there. Pretty substantial size plane to have a tail same size as this guy, so should be awesome. Okay, so the manual basically says, get this thing installed, glue it in place, kind of says CA, kind of shows epoxy. I don't think it's super critical because all you're doing is keeping this thing in place and preventing it from sliding in and out. That's the point of that. So, and then we're putting our surfaces on, we are marking the location there. We're drilling a 3mm hole and then using the screw to screw into everything. So let's do a little bit of playing around and get this step figured out. All right, and a little update on the Jersey Modeler manual fuel jug. So this is the one with the DLE hand pump. So I've had some time to play around with this, and I tell you, this thing moves a ton of liquid. Very, very impressive. The gears are very accurate. You can tell just by how it moves. So definitely a great, great addition to the lineup from Jersey Modeler. I'm very impressed with this. I actually wouldn't have a problem filling up one of my turbine aircraft with like 5 to 7 liters of fuel with this thing. Take a little bit of work on your hand, but it wouldn't be as bad as some of the alternative pumps out there, the black versions. So it's a very impressive manual pump. So if you guys are looking for a manual version, definitely check this one out. It is awesome. Very impressed with it. You can get it from the Jersey Modeler website or also the lighter side of rc.com. You can shoot me an email, and pretty cool setup. Very impressed. Okay, so a couple thoughts on putting these elevators on this aircraft. So we've got the standard servo lead coming out here because this is the actual lead off of the servo. So that actually works out perfect. We're going to keep that the way it is. Now, if we were to leave that lead on the fuselage side loose, what's going to happen is when we put this together, it's going to push in to the fuselage. Now, there's not a ton of extra room in there, so there is a chance that that lead could rest against the tailpipe, which we don't want. So I think the best course of action here is we're going to actually fix this plug-in right here on the fuselage. We're just going to fit it in the center of this location. And then we want the excess to go into the horizontal stab surface, and we've got plenty of room in this area to be able to do that. And what that means is our length here is going to be fixed, solidly mounted, and that's a good solution there. And then we've got lots of room in here for our excess, which is perfect. So just some kind of random thoughts of me that I've had on that. Okay, so with this inserted, we took our fine Sharpie, marked the lines of the fuselage, took this piece out, did a little bit of sanding on the side of those marks as it's shown in the manual. Now we can reinstall this and get it glued in place. All right, guys, so my best suggestion to you to mark these things on the wing is get the surface installed and then just screw in the 3mm screw, and it will make its own mark. And it'll just be more accurate than trying to use a drill bit and going through there, because we're going to get a perfect outline of where we need that mark to be. So anyways, now we'll drill through the mounting surface there. All right, so one glaringly obvious thing that's not talked about in the manual at all is the mounting of the rudder. So we go into making the rudder right here in step number 20. Then we go into mounting the elevators, and then we go into mounting the wings, the wingtips, the gear, and that is basically it. So there's a little bit of a mention here about the wiring harness for the rear, but that's everything. So anyways, when we mount the elevators and get that all wired up, you also want to mount the vertical or the rudder at the same time. So that's all part of this plan. So we've got the two metal aluminum dowels or rods, tubes actually, that go through here. There's the plastic rod coming out of the vertical, and that gets mounted with the metal wing nut here, which is nice and simple. So obviously the rudder is not really removable, because in order to remove it, you would need to take the entire tail pipe out and all that kind of stuff. So definitely not removable, but this gets mounted on the inside of the fuselage when that threaded piece goes through there. So next thing we've done is we've cut two sections of maxi wire. What I did to measure that was go from this point in the fuselage to the front of the rear section, then from the rear part of the front section up to the nose. So we've got plenty of excess lead. So now what we want to do is we want to crimp on two of the female ends so we can get those mounted in the center of the holes here, which will allow the elevators to plug in. All right, and our plug-in is all created on the fuselage side here. So a nice simple solution to this, especially because we have a pre-made hole. It's not something we cut out. If it was something we cut out, we could have just made the hole perfectly sized for the female keeper for the servo. But in this case, it was made by the manufacturer. So basically what I did was take a piece of sponge like this, cut a slit in it, and put the servo lead through and stuffed the sponge into the space. Now it compresses it quite a bit, and then what you can do is just soak it with medium CA and thin CA as well, and then spray some kicker on there. And it is incredibly solid now, and it's not going anywhere. And we've got a nice simple plug-in when we go to install these stabs like that. And all you do is plug your servo in, and we're just going to mark positive towards the front because that's the way it's oriented, negative towards the back, and then we know which way our servo lead plugs in. So we're going to do that on the other side now, and I'll give you a shot here of inside just so you can see it. And we've got the servo lead going over top of all the braces and elevator mounts and all that stuff. And then it's going to get covered in snakeskin and be run forward. All right, so now that we've got both leads done for the horizontal stabs, we're going to move on to the vertical or the rudder. Now, because this really isn't removable, what we're going to do is we're going to make up another servo lead. We're going to attach this to the rudder servo, and then we are going to shrink wrap it and tuck it up top there, and then run it through the fuselage. So no reason to really make that easily removable, because you're, again, as we've talked about, you're not taking that rudder off unless you're pulling the pipe. Okay, so moving on to mounting the vertical. So we've got stops built into the surface. So if you take these tubes, put them in the surface, they go in quite easily, but they do stop in the surface. Now in the fuselage, there is no stops. So you can keep pushing that rod through and it will come all the way through its carbon holder. Now this is a much stiffer fit. Inez, thanks for the help. Much stiffer fit in the fuselage, like you really got to push it in there. So it's going to stick quite well inside the fuselage. But you want to make sure that you've got enough going into the actual surface. So right now these are flush mounted with the bottom of those carbon rods, but when I go to put this, this surface on, I'm going to lift these up. So when I slide the surface on, then it's pushing the rods into the fuselage, and we've got our distance sorted out perfectly. And there is our tail fully assembled. Really, really sizable tail, as I've talked about on this thing already. Very impressive actually for such a, not small aircraft, but a smaller size aircraft. So it should handle very nicely. So we've got that all set up. Time to move on to the next portion of the manual. All right, so we've got the snakeskin all installed to the back surfaces there. We used some shrink tubing on the back side just because of positioning, and then just a zip tie on this side. So this is, you can see there is a substantial amount, and basically the snakeskin gets us past the turbine and pipe and all that type of stuff. So as we're sticking to the manual, as we've talked about, there's no rudder installation in the manual, but that is done. And now we can move on to mounting the wings onto the fuselage. So basically what it says here is we are putting these tabbies in right here. Those are going in the main wing. They need to be glued in place, and they are to stick out 27 millimeters from the wing on the shortest side is kind of what it says there. So we're going to follow these instructions. Tells you where to drill the hole in the fuselage, drill bit size, blind nuts, all that kind of stuff. So that is all there. Now, one kind of interesting point here, and this is just me kind of making some assumptions, there's only one of these washers right here, and I think these washers are to sink your blind nut in, because you drill the hole, get your blind nut ready, you have to sink your blind nut into the interior wood, and it shows using a big fat washer there, which I think this might be the one for that. Just guessing. And then it shows it threading in with the normal screw and washer. So we'll see how that all goes, and once we're done the wings, then we're moving on to tip tanks and stuff, but let's tackle these wings first. So we're going to set the tail aside over here, and we're going to get the main fuselage up on the bench so we can get our wings installed. All right, so we've got our tabs here marked. I've also sanded them down on both sides. Now there's quite a bit of leeway in these things in the wings, also in the fuselage side there's quite a bit of leeway too. So we do have a fair bit of room to play with here, but basically I've got it marked as far as how far to go in. So what we're going to do is we're going to get these installed, and then we're going to put the wings on the fuselage and have all of that stuff sitting flat and level, so then at least our tabs that plug in right here are sitting in a comfortable position that doesn't affect the wings, ultimately, is what I'm looking for. So all we're going to do is get this like that, and then we're going to, the wood comes in about ½ an inch in this area, and then it's just a wide open space, so it's not like you need to go super far or anything in here, but we need to make sure we've got a sufficient amount of glue so everything's covered. It's a great time in the video to thank each and every one of you that have donated to the Shop Build Fund. Thank you so much for those donations. It is extremely helpful in making things possible here at the Lighter Side of RC. We're still collecting donations to one day build a standalone building. Of course, we're in the home, or our temporary home for now, and looking towards that goal of one day having a separate, larger standalone building to have everything happen in. Now, we have had a few visitors over the past couple weeks to the shop here, and it's been a lot of fun hanging out in the shop and getting stuff done, working on turbines and working on different projects. And it'll be even more fun when we have our own building. Okay, so now we've got lots of glue on there and in the hole. So we're just going to get that installed like that. We'll clean off the excess. Now, once this is all cured, we may have to go back and do a little bit of sanding and clean up work to make sure that everything jives together, but at least this gets us in the right wheelhouse. Okay, so now that that's installed, now we take our calipers, we measure out 27 millimeters, which we are right there, and we will get the fuselage laid flat, and we'll install this in the fuselage so this can sit down properly. So we're just going to switch directions here, and obviously we've got some lines and all that kind of stuff coming out, so we won't be able to fully insert that into the wing, but at least we can get it close. So all I'm looking to do in this situation is just to make sure that we've got the tab sitting in the right location and that we have enough going into the fuselage. Because kind of the last thing you want to do is glue this tab in place and then find out that it's at the wrong angle or something like that. That would be not so good. There we go. So tab is now sitting against the bottom of the fuselage, which is perfect. And we're going to get the other wing done, and then we'll just leave this stuff to cure. All right, so we've let these wings cure for about 12 hours. So the high sol is nice and solid now. So what we want to do now is we want to pull this out. I need to get my wires kind of sorted out so I can insert this wing all the way, and then we can work on the fastening system for the wings. Okay, so we flipped the wing over, we flipped the fuselage over, and we're going to get the left wing here drilled and installed. So next step in the manual is we take the slot that the G10 material or fiberglass material fits into, and we measure 16 millimeters in, and you're roughly in the center of the slot. Now that piece of wood does kind of angle a little bit, so keep that in mind. It doesn't need to be super accurate because it's just getting you in kind of the middle part of the wood. So our calipers are set to 16 millimeters. I've measured in 16 millimeters, put a little Sharpie mark there. So now what we'll do is we'll take that wing, get it installed, get our wires and stuff all fed through here so we can butt that wing in tight, drill the hole. Okay, so now instructions say take a 4 millimeter drill bit. Now this is imperial, so it's I think 3.94 millimeters or somewhere very close to that. So our wing is pushed in all the way. And when we drill this, we're going to be drilling through the fiberglass board, through the wood. Now we may need to oversize that hole a little bit to fit our blind nut into the wood, but now what we have here is the bolt that actually holds the wing on can go all the way through everything, and but we'll check and see what we need to do for that blind nut. Okay, so now what we've done is we've pulled the wing out, flipped the fuselage over, and the manual talks about getting this blind nut installed and screwing this from the bottom of the fuselage. So we've put that that big washer on there to be able to sink the blind nut down. So that's the next step. So we're going to get this kind of jigged up and we'll tighten this down and see how it all works out. Okay, just to give you a shot here of what's going on. So we have that all threaded in. We've tightened this down all the way. And that's what the backside looks like. So you'll see that the blind nut's not sunken down all the way. Now, that's basically because the shank of the blind nut is longer than the pieces of wood. But what happens there is the slot where the piece comes through from the wing actually sits higher than the face of the wood. So that all works out okay, and I think that should be good. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take the bolt out of this system, back it off a little bit. We'll reinstall the wing and make sure everything lines up good. And then once that's done, we'll put some high sol around the blind nut so it stays put. Okay, so you really want this step to be as accurate as possible because this is what's tensioning your wings against the fuselage. So you can see there, our hole lines up perfect. Our wing bolt, or wing bolt I guess we'll call it, comes right through the middle of our hole, so it's nice and perfect. And I think that worked out absolutely awesome. So nice system, very simple on behalf of Boomerang's construction here, and I think it's a great setup. They've got a nice accurate fit on the wing fuselage joint. And there's a shot from the underside, so looks great. All right, so I'm just in the process of fitting the other wing, and I want to show you one of the difficulties we've run into here. So what happened was I was just getting this wing pushed in for the last time. We've got the blind nut mounted there and everything, but what I noticed was the anti-rotation pin was actually pushed in all the way right there. So pulled the wing out, pulled the pin back out, and you can see that we've got a bit of a gap on, there we go. You can see we've got a bit of a gap on the bottom side or the aft back side of the pin, and the front side of the pin is hitting the fuselage. So we do need to adjust that hole a little bit, and not a huge deal because the strength of the wing fuselage joint is in our tubes. This is just a line-up pin or an anti-rotation pin. So we do need to adjust that, and then what we'll do is we'll put some more CA on this anti-rotation pin. There's an access hole where the wires come out right there, so that's not a big deal. But so what I'll do is take a Sharpie and just mark this right now, and that gives me an idea of how much material we need to remove, and I'll just use a drill bit for that. All right, and now we have both of our wings successfully mounted, and we are all good. So next thing to do, or last step to do, is we're gonna pull those wings off, and we're gonna put some high sol around the blind nuts now that everything's fit and matched good, and that will be the final step for mounting the wings on the aircraft. Okay, and now that we are just getting ready to pull the wings off, what I would like to do is just mark the C of G so we have an idea where it's at. So we're, according to the manual, we're 160 millimeters back from the leading edge of the wing. So our C of G is right there. And then we'll just measure the other side as well. So now we've got our C of G marked, and according to the way it's laid out here, we've got a joint line in the fuselage right there where the ruler is. So we're just probably a centimeter, 7 millimeters in front of that fuselage joint, roughly. So anyways, now we know where the C of G is, and it's already marked. So all right, and I'll just show you the final step in the wing installation here, so you can see that we've put some high sol around the blind nut, and we've done that to both sides. So now that needs to cure, and it just keeps that blind nut in place. It's not going anywhere, and the wings are fit. All right, guys, and that is going to be everything for this video, this episode of the Boomerang Ranger build. We're making some good progress on this plane. It's definitely a quick build. It's been a pretty simple assembly, not a lot of issues, very accurate setup. Very impressive little plane. I can't say it enough how amazing this little plane is. Definitely a great first jet for anybody out there, or a great jet for anybody who is an experienced flyer as well too. So we'll probably, just a rough guess here, probably 2 more videos to wrap this aircraft up. But in the next video, we're basically going to be putting the fuselage sections together, finishing the wingtip lights, I think, is the next step. So wingtip lights and tip tanks, installing the gear. We'll be joining the fuselage together and kind of getting into the organizing of the aircraft. So it's going together great, very impressive. So if you guys have any questions or comments, make sure you list them down below. You can also reach out to me by email, thelightersideofrc@gmail.com. Thanks guys for watching, and we will see you in the next video.